I remember the night she first told me she felt uncomfortable around my friends. It wasn't dramatic. There were no raised voices, no harsh words, just that quiet, almost imperceptible tension that hung in the air like a thin fog. We were sitting in the living room, the kind of late evening when the world outside is soft and muted, and all you hear is the hum of the heater and the occasional clink of her spoon against her coffee mug. I was staring at the TV, pretending to watch some old sitcom rerun, but really, I was listening. And then she said it, I don't feel safe around them, she whispered, almost like she was apologizing to herself. Her hands were wrapped tightly around the mug. Knuckles white, and she kept looking past me, at nothing in particular. I nodded. I said all the things people say when they want to soothe someone without knowing if it actually helps. I understand, I murmured. You don't have to be around them if it makes you uncomfortable. But inside, my chest tightened, a strange mix of panic and guilt, the kind that makes your stomach feel hollow. I didn't know why it hurt so much. My friends weren't perfect, sure, they could be loud, crude, messy, but they were family to me. That night, the apartment felt different. Smaller. Quieter. I found myself unconsciously straightening cushions, stacking books, even moving my chair a few inches, like adjusting the room could somehow erase the tension she'd planted. She didn't ask me to, but I did it anyway. There was this strange, creeping thought that maybe if I smoothed everything around her, if I softened every corner of my life, she'd feel safe again. And without realizing it, I started pulling back. Not just from my friends, but from little pieces of my life I hadn't noticed I was letting go. I didn't sleep much that night. Every sound, the fridge humming, the soft creak of the floorboards, felt amplified. Like some warning bell I couldn't identify. I kept replaying her words over and over, trying to find where I went wrong. Was it something I did? Something I didn't do? Or was it something I couldn't fix? The thought of confronting her about it felt too heavy, but pretending nothing had changed felt heavier. And somewhere, deep down, a quiet part of me started to wonder if this was the first step in losing her, or losing myself. Before that night, life felt easier. Messy, loud, imperfect, but easy. My friends had been part of my routine for years, like furniture I didn't have to think about. On weekends, we'd meet at our usual spot, a tiny diner with flickering neon and sticky floors, trading bad jokes over greasy breakfasts. Or we'd play video games until my thumbs ached, shouting over each other, laughing so hard it hurt. She had met them a few times, always polite, always reserved, the quiet observer in a room full of chaos. I had thought that was fine, she was different from them, and I liked that, even at home, routines carried a comforting rhythm. Saturday mornings I'd make coffee just the way she liked it. And she'd linger over the newspaper while I scrolled through the weekend headlines on my phone. I knew the sound of her spoon tapping the mug, the faint sigh when she stretched, even the way she hummed when she was lost in thought. My friends weren't present in these moments, and that was okay. Life was compartmentalized, each part fitting neatly into its slot: friends, her, work, home. I had always felt confident in my balance. I could joke with my friends about stupid things, roll my eyes at their antics, and still come home and feel completely at ease with her. My world was contained, familiar, predictable in a way that made me feel safe. I could be loud, silly, even selfish with them. And still come back to her calm presence, knowing that nothing had shifted in the core of my life. Even now, thinking back, I can almost hear the small sounds of those days, the rattle of mugs on the counter, the faint hum of my laptop as my friend streamed yet another movie, the soft shuffle of her socks across the wooden floor. There was a rhythm to it, a stability I didn't appreciate until it started to unravel. I remember feeling proud of how I could navigate both worlds. I had built a life where chaos and peace coexisted without friction. And yet, in the quiet aftermath of that confession, I felt an unfamiliar tremor in that balance, a shadow creeping along the edges of something I'd taken for granted. It wasn't just that she had been honest with me, it was that I had realized how fragile my equilibrium really was. And the strange, sinking thought began to form: what if keeping her comfortable meant shifting the balance I had worked so hard to maintain? It started small. Almost imperceptible. At first, I told myself it was nothing, just minor adjustments to make her feel at ease. If she said she wasn't comfortable around my friends, I wouldn't invite them over that weekend. If she mentioned she felt awkward in crowded spaces, I'd skip the usual Saturday night bar trips. I convinced myself I was doing it out of love, out of care. But somewhere in the back of my mind, a faint unease was growing, like a thread pulling at the seams of my life. I remember the first time I noticed it. One of my closest friends had texted me, joking about meeting for our usual late-night burger run. I hesitated. My thumb hovered over the screen, and I could feel her eyes on me from across the room. She hadn't said anything, but her presence was enough. I typed a vague excuse, something about work I didn't even have, and hit send. That night, as I lay in bed, I felt a strange mixture of relief and guilt. Relief because I hadn't upset her, guilt because I knew I was lying, to my friend, and, in a way, to myself. Even at home, things began to shift subtly. I found myself moving chairs so that she'd have space, lowering the volume of the TV when she came into the room, even rethinking the jokes I told when she was around. I told myself it was normal, that compromise was part of a relationship. But it wasn't just compromise. It was anticipation, an anxiety about what might make her uncomfortable, what might make her withdraw. I was no longer acting freely in my own home. I was tiptoeing, walking around invisible lines I didn't fully understand, and the more I pulled back, the more I noticed the subtle ways she seemed to relax in response. A smile, a lighter laugh, her shoulders easing from that constant tension I hadn't realized she carried. I started telling myself that this was enough. That if I could keep her comfortable, everything else would fall into place. But each time I skipped a night with friends or silenced a joke, I felt a tiny part of myself receding. My life, my identity, was slowly compressing into the space she could inhabit without fear. I didn't recognize it yet, but that first small pull was the beginning of a drift I couldn't control. I thought I was protecting her, keeping peace. But in reality, I was beginning to lose the balance I had always counted on, and the quiet, creeping thought had started to form, maybe peace comes at too high a cost. It wasn't anything dramatic at first. Just little things that didn't sit right, small cracks in the version of reality I'd been holding on to. She would mention something about one of my friends, a passing comment, offhand, almost polite, but the tone carried this undercurrent I couldn't place. A pause before she spoke, a slight tightening around her eyes, like she was measuring her words before letting them out. And sometimes, when I asked a clarifying question, she'd laugh it off, shrug, and say, "It's nothing. Don't worry about it." But the problem was, I did worry. I couldn't stop noticing these tiny hesitations, these almost imperceptible silences that stretched too long. The way she checked her phone more often when my friends were around. The way she sometimes avoided being in the same room when one of them called. And yet, whenever I tried to understand, she insisted everything was fine. "I'm just not used to that kind of energy," she said once, as if that explained it all. But her explanation didn't fit neatly. Something felt off, and I started questioning myself. I began replaying every social interaction in my head, dissecting every laugh, every glance, every tone. Was I imagining it? Was I overthinking? Or was there really something there that she wasn't saying? I could see it in the small things, the way she fiddled with her keys when I mentioned meeting a friend, or how she would subtly redirect conversations when their names came up. And yet, when I pressed too hard, when I tried to connect the dots, I felt myself stepping into dangerous territory, like I was trying to force a pattern that didn't exist. The quietest moments became the loudest. Sitting together on the couch, I'd catch her staring at the floor, her fingers tracing invisible shapes on her lap, and I'd wonder what she was thinking. I wanted to trust her entirely, but the mind has a way of finding shadows even where there are none. I began to feel this creeping uncertainty, not about her, not about my friends, but about myself. Was I too sensitive? Too paranoid? Too willing to read meaning where there wasn't any? And yet, as much as I tried to rationalize it, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. That subtle discomfort she carried wasn't just hers, it had started to seep into me, infecting my own sense of comfort. And the more I noticed, the more I realized that I was slowly unraveling the life I thought I had perfectly balanced. I didn't know it yet, but these lingering doubts were the first threads pulling at the fabric of everything I believed about us. By the time a few months had passed, the changes were no longer small. I wasn't just skipping nights out, I was actively avoiding them. Invitations from my friends piled up, half-forgotten texts, casual check-ins, all met with vague excuses. I have work early, not feeling up to it, maybe next time. The words tasted hollow even as I typed them. Sometimes, I'd pause mid-text, staring at the blinking cursor, wondering who I was becoming. At home, it was worse. I found myself arranging the apartment differently, subtly, so that she had space, so that no corner felt hostile or overwhelming. I dimmed the lights when my friends called, muted notifications, erased the laughter and chaos that had once been the heartbeat of my life. And she seemed calmer, lighter. The tension in her shoulders softened. I told myself that this was proof I was doing the right thing, but the more I pulled away, the emptier I felt. Conversations with friends that once sparked laughter now ended with awkward silences. I could feel their confusion, maybe even resentment, seeping through the cracks. I started noticing how I no longer had anything to tell them, how my stories had shrunk, how my humor had dulled. Pieces of myself I didn't even know I owned were slipping away quietly, almost imperceptibly, with each skipped hangout, each avoided joke, each gesture I suppressed. Sometimes, late at night, I'd catch my reflection in the darkened window. The man staring back at me wasn't the one who had laughed too loudly at a stupid meme, who had teased his friends mercilessly, who had felt comfortable in his own chaos. It was someone smaller, quieter, cautious. I felt like a guest in my own life, tiptoeing around invisible rules I hadn't written but felt compelled to follow, and yet, I couldn't stop. Each compromise felt necessary, each small withdrawal justified. I told myself I was protecting her, preserving peace, keeping love intact. But inside, a subtle dread had begun to coil around me. I couldn't shake the feeling that in trying to create comfort for her, I was erasing comfort for myself. That one day, I might wake up and realize I didn't know who I had become, or if I even existed in the same world I once had. Even now, I can remember the quiet nights, the apartment silent except for her soft breathing, the faint hum of the heater, the empty chairs where friends should have been. I convinced myself it was normal, temporary. But somewhere, deep down, I knew that quiet wasn't peaceful. It was hollow. One evening, weeks after the quiet had settled into our routine, she finally offered an explanation. Not a vague comment or a passing remark, something specific. We were sitting at the kitchen table, the dim overhead light casting soft shadows across the worn wood. Her hands were wrapped around her mug again, but this time they weren't trembling. She seemed resolved. There was that night at your friend's place, she said quietly, almost like confessing a secret. I felt cornered. I didn't know how to leave without making it awkward. They were loud, teasing in a way I didn't understand, and I just froze. She described the incident in detail. Someone had made a joke at her expense. One she hadn't laughed at, and she'd felt exposed. The way she told it, it sounded plausible, normal, even. I nodded slowly, telling myself that this was it. This was the reason. A clear moment, an understandable discomfort. If I stayed away from those situations, it would make sense. I could protect her. I could do the right thing. And for a while, it felt like relief. The fog of uncertainty lifted. The anxiety that had been gnawing at me softened, replaced with a sense of purpose. I told myself I was doing what any caring partner would do: respect boundaries, avoid triggers, maintain peace. It all made sense. I wasn't paranoid. She wasn't overreacting. And maybe, just maybe, I was finally getting it right, but even as I believed it, there was a small, almost imperceptible flicker of doubt. Something about the way she told the story felt rehearsed, like it had been polished over time. Her eyes didn't waver, but they also didn't shine with the kind of discomfort I would expect from that memory. I brushed it aside, convincing myself I was imagining things. After all, wasn't this exactly what she had needed from me? Comfort. Safety. Peace, and yet, in that very moment, I could feel the quiet stretching around me, the empty chairs, the muted phone notifications, the absence of laughter. It was supposed to feel resolved, but something inside whispered that it wasn't. That maybe this explanation, as comforting as it seemed, wasn't the whole story. But I didn't know how to ask without breaking the fragile balance I'd spent months building. For a while, I believed her story. I let myself feel the relief of understanding, of finally having a reason that fit neatly into the narrative I'd been struggling to hold together. I told myself I was doing the right thing, that keeping my distance was an act of care. But life has a way of whispering truths in moments so quiet, you almost don't notice until they've settled like dust on your shoulders. It started with tiny inconsistencies. A laugh she shared with a friend of hers over the phone, something I wasn't supposed to hear, didn't match the unease she described. A story she recounted about an evening at her own work event contradicted the careful caution she'd claimed to feel around my friends. Small things, almost meaningless on their own, but together they began to accumulate like loose threads threatening to unravel a sweater. I tried to ignore it, telling myself I was reading too much into nothing. But the mind doesn't always obey reason. Every glance she avoided, every pause in conversation, every text left unsent began to echo louder than any explanation she could give. I found myself scanning her social media, replaying interactions in my head, searching for patterns that might justify the unease settling in my chest. And the more I looked, the more I felt that quiet tug of suspicion, the sense that I wasn't seeing the full picture. The worst part was that I couldn't confront her without feeling like the villain. If I questioned her version of events, it would seem accusatory. It would seem controlling. And yet, not asking felt like surrender. I was caught between doubt and loyalty, between fear of conflict and fear of being blind. I started lying to myself about my own feelings, pretending the unease was just stress, or insecurity, or maybe a temporary misalignment in our relationship. But deep down, I knew it wasn't temporary. By then, the apartment had grown quieter than ever. The hum of the heater, once background comfort, now felt like the ticking of a clock counting down the moments I had left to understand what was really happening. And every time she laughed, light, fleeting, innocent seeming, I felt a pang of confusion, a stab of guilt, and an unfamiliar dread. Something wasn't right. I didn't know what, but I knew that the fragile world I had built around us was shifting again, imperceptibly, dangerously. The unease didn't announce itself with a bang. It crept in through small, quiet things, her phone left face down on the counter, a sudden hesitation when I asked about her day, tiny smiles exchanged with someone I didn't know. At first, I chalked it up to imagination. Paranoia, maybe. Stress. But these moments began to pile up, each one heavier than the last. One evening, I noticed a message notification pop up on her screen before she quickly swiped it away. I didn't read it, it wasn't mine to read, but something in the movement made my stomach twist. She caught me staring, and for a second, there was a flicker in her expression, almost defensive, almost guilty. "It's nothing," she said, too quickly, too lightly. I wanted to press, to ask, but a part of me hesitated. I didn't want to seem controlling. I didn't want to break what little peace we still had. Other small things followed. The way she would sometimes leave a room when I was about to ask a question. How she occasionally laughed at her phone in a way that seemed secretive, as if she were sharing something I wasn't meant to see. And yet, when I tried to bring up my doubts, her responses were calm, soothing, almost rehearsed. "I promise, it's nothing. Trust me." And I wanted to trust her. I really did. But the quiet gnawing at the edge of my mind refused to be silenced. I started replaying conversations, analyzing the pauses, the slight shifts in tone. My friends noticed my distance too. One of them asked if everything was okay, and I smiled, deflecting, saying I was fine. Fine. The word felt hollow. I wasn't fine. Something in the pattern of her behavior was off, but I couldn't pinpoint it. I couldn't put words to it. And the more I tried to force clarity, the more I realized that pressing too hard might push her away, or worse, reveal a truth I wasn't ready to face. By then, the apartment felt heavier. Her presence was comforting in some ways, but also a reminder that I was walking a line I didn't fully understand. Silence had become a weapon, and secrecy its companion. I could feel the tension building, a quiet storm just beneath the surface, and every glance, every gesture, every unspoken word was a reminder that something in our life was unraveling. I just didn't know what it was yet. It hit me the night I wasn't supposed to notice. I was cleaning up the kitchen, absent-mindedly wiping crumbs off the counter, when a notification buzzed softly from her laptop across the room. I didn't mean to look, but the screen lit up, and there it was, a series of messages that made my chest tighten so fast I almost dropped the dish towel. I froze. The words weren't cruel or confrontational, they were intimate. Too intimate. Casual jokes, shared laughter, references to things only we had shared. Not with my friends, not at a party, not in some minor misunderstanding. These were the small, private things I had trusted her with, being passed back and forth with someone I didn't know. Someone outside of both of us. I shouldn't have opened it further, but curiosity, and the knot in my gut, propelled me. And the truth hit me like a splash of ice water. My suspicion, my unease, all the tiny inconsistencies I had been trying to rationalize, they weren't paranoia. I had been seeing fragments of her behavior, dismissing them, turning them over in my mind like pieces of a puzzle I couldn't solve. But this was the real pattern. My first instinct was shock, then a surge of betrayal. I felt the walls of the apartment close in, the quiet hum of the heater suddenly deafening. How long had this been happening? How many moments had I misread? The tiny evasions, the laughter over her phone, the pauses and hesitations, all of it made sense now, but the clarity brought no relief. Only this twisting pit of disbelief, and then came the guilt. Not for her, not for them, but for me. For every choice I'd made, every withdrawal, every skipped night, every joke I had muted. I had pulled back from the people I loved in an attempt to protect her, to preserve peace, but the peace I thought I was creating was never real. It was an illusion. And I had done it willingly, unknowingly isolating myself while she was elsewhere. I sat there, the dish towel slipping from my hands, staring at the laptop like it held answers I wasn't ready to see. And somewhere beneath the shock, beneath the hurt, a quieter, more devastating realization began to creep in. The problem wasn't my friends. It wasn't even her discomfort. It was the life I thought we had, the trust one believed in, slowly unraveling in ways I had never imagined. I couldn't hold it in any longer. That night, I waited until she was in the kitchen, rinsing her mug, the soft drip of water echoing in the otherwise quiet apartment. My hands were trembling, I didn't even realize until I touched the counter, and my throat felt tight, like swallowing the words themselves would break me. I saw the messages, I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. The words sounded foreign coming from me. She froze mid-motion, fingers gripping the mug, eyes wide. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The only sound was the slow hum of the heater and the faint ticking of the clock on the wall. Her eyes softened, then hardened. I didn't mean for you to see that," she said, voice low. There was no apology, no attempt to explain immediately, just the weight of truth settling in the space between us. I could feel every moment of my life over the past months crashing down around me. The skipped nights, the withdrawn texts, the silent isolation I had imposed on myself, all for something I thought I understood but hadn't. My chest ached with a mix of betrayal and shame. I wanted to scream, to demand answers, but I didn't. I just sat there, staring, feeling the air thicken with everything we hadn't said. I thought I was doing the right thing," I whispered. I thought keeping distance, avoiding conflict, making everything safe. That it was enough. I didn't know. My voice broke on the last word, and I couldn't tell if I was more angry at her, at myself, or at the quiet life we had been building together that had suddenly collapsed. She looked away, biting her lip, her shoulders tense. "I never wanted to hurt you," she said softly, almost too softly. I guess I didn't know how to tell you everything. I didn't know how to ask you to understand." We didn't speak for a long time after that. The apartment felt enormous, empty, charged with every unspoken word, every moment of miscommunication. Every choice made in isolation. I felt both exposed and hollow. My identity, already fraying from months of quiet withdrawals, seemed to have unraveled completely. And in the thick, suffocating silence, I realized that nothing would be easy to fix. Even now, replaying it in my head, I can feel the tension lingering, the ache of betrayal, the moral weight of decisions made out of love but rooted in fear. And somewhere beneath it all, a lingering question: could I ever trust again? Could I even trust myself? The days after that night were quieter than I expected, but the silence wasn't peaceful. It was heavy, the kind that presses down on your chest and leaves a dull ache behind your ribs. She tried to act normal, offered smiles that didn't reach her eyes, small gestures that felt like apologies without words. I wanted to respond, to meet her halfway, but every interaction reminded me of the messages, of the months I'd spent retreating from the people I loved, of the trust I'd assumed I had. My friends noticed first. Invitations that had once been routine now came with hesitant tones, subtle questions I couldn't meet with confidence. "Is everything okay?" They'd ask, and I would nod, a tight smile plastered on my face. Hiding the truth that I didn't even fully understand myself. I had isolated myself so completely that reconnecting felt awkward, almost alien. The laughter we once shared was gone, replaced with a quiet that felt too loud, too pointed, and then there was her. Being around her became complicated, loaded with unspoken rules. Every glance, every word, every small movement carried weight. I found myself calculating my reactions, suppressing humor, avoiding certain topics, trying to navigate a minefield I hadn't realized existed until it was too late. I wanted to trust her again, to rebuild what we had, but the foundation we'd been standing on had shifted, and the cracks were deeper than I'd imagined. I also started questioning myself. Had my fear and desire for peace pushed me into a life of isolation? Had I let her discomfort dictate my choices to the point that I no longer recognized who I was? It was a strange, painful mirror, seeing yourself in someone else's shadow, realizing the parts of yourself you've surrendered while trying to do the right thing. The apartment felt different too. Empty chairs, quiet rooms, muted laughter that once belonged to us now echoes in memory only. And every time I caught a glimpse of her expression, neutral, careful, cautious, I felt that same hollow ache. The trust, once so effortless, had been fractured. Rebuilding it seemed possible but terrifying. Like attempting to mend glass that had already cracked, and even now, as I replay those days in my head, I can't decide if I misjudged her, misread myself, or if love simply isn't enough to shield you from the consequences of silence and compromise. The questions linger: can we go back to what we were? Should we even try? Or is this the cost of trying to protect someone else at the expense of yourself? Now, months later, I still catch myself replaying it all. The quiet apartment, the blurred boundaries I created, the messages I wasn't supposed to see. Sometimes I wonder if I was too quick to assume the worst, if my own fears and insecurities distorted the picture until I couldn't see clearly. Other times, I think about the trust that was fractured and realize that maybe it was never just about her, it was about me, my choices, my unwillingness to confront the discomfort until it had grown too large to ignore. I sit in the same living room where it all began, and I notice the subtle changes. The chairs aren't pulled as close together. The apartment is quieter, emptier, and my friend's laughter no longer fills the rooms the way it used to. I think about the moments I could have asked more questions, held more space, balanced care with honesty, but didn't. I wonder if trust can be rebuilt after months of doubt and isolation, or if some fractures run too deep. Sometimes I imagine a conversation where nothing is hidden, where every fear, every hesitation, every secret is laid bare, and we navigate it together. But the truth is, I don't know if that's possible anymore. I don't know if the peace I wanted for her can coexist with the life I lost along the way. And even now, when I try to imagine moving forward, there's a lingering question that refuses to fade: was I wrong to retreat, to protect, to compromise so much of myself? Maybe love isn't just about care or comfort. Maybe it's about facing the uncomfortable, speaking the hard truths, even when it risks everything. Or maybe I was justified, trying to preserve what little harmony I could, even at the cost of my own identity. I don't have the answer. All I have are the echoes of the choices I made, the silence that followed, and the uneasy knowledge that some questions may never be answered, and so I sit here, wondering, could I have done better? Could we have done better? Or was this just the cost of trying to love, imperfectly, in a world where even small decisions carry weight far beyond what we imagine?